Quickly, before I start this video, I just want to mention, if you found this through YouTube recommendations, welcome. My name's Tyler, but I go by Resurrected on TikTok and now YouTube as well. This is going to be my first video on TikTok. I try to keep my videos under a minute long, but that just gets really difficult when I want to talk about things like this video's Linux distros. So I wanted to start this channel just to be able to talk about stuff that I can't condense into a minute, because there's a lot of it. In fact, I'm probably going to redo a lot of my TikToks much longer on here to talk about it a lot more in depth. Um, but yeah, enjoy. I'm gonna film the rest of this tomorrow because it's currently, I think, 1 a.m. Yeah, it's 1:11. I just want to be able to get the motivation to finish this tomorrow. So we are gonna cut in 3, 2, 1. I can't do a snap to edit. I'm not that good at editing, but we are gonna cut over right now. I'm pretty sure that's what I said yesterday. I mean, when I edit this, it's probably going to be seamless. You won't even notice. Like, my shirt, it's as if it just appeared on me. Anyways, Linux distros, that's what we're talking about today. Before I actually talk about switching to Linux and the different distros you can choose from, let's first just get an understanding of what Linux is and why you should probably consider switching to it in 2026. So a common mistake people make with Linux is they think it's the actual operating system that you're running, and while that's kinda true, it technically isn't. Linux is just the name of the kernel that the operating system is running. If you don't know what a kernel is, it's pretty much the middleman between the software on your computer and your hardware. An app will be like, hey, I need this much of, let's say, your GPU or your CPU's resources. The kernel will look at what's available and be like, all right, you can have some of this. The app can request more, can request less. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's a very simple understanding. The kernel is what allows your hardware to be used in your software. Now, the Linux kernel can be found in a whole ton of places, even most Android phones. The Android operating system is based off of an extremely modified Linux kernel meant to be used with like mobile devices and touchscreens instead of a desktop computer like this. When people are talking about using Linux, however, on a desktop or a laptop, they're mostly talking about using a Linux distro, which takes the Linux kernel and adds a set of standardized, apps and features and makes them usable with a mouse, a keyboard, and a desktop environment like this, and lets you install all sorts of apps that can pretty much be installed on most distros. The difference between using something like Windows and a Linux distro is Windows is really pre-configured from the start. It has all of Microsoft's stuff in it. While a Linux distro, each person that maintains one, since it's fully open source, anyone can make one, you can throw whatever you want in there, pre-installed, installed in the background. There's just a whole lot of configurations of how you can get a Linux distro running, and that's the beauty of it. I am by no means an expert on Linux. This is a very basic understanding of just what I know off the top of my head and a little bit of research before recording. You can go online and look up a lot more people that are way more experienced with this kind of stuff and can explain to you exactly what everything does. I'm not one of those people. I'm just here to talk about Linux because I like it. Now let's get into why you may be considering switching to Linux in 2026, because if this was on your recommendations, chances are this isn't the first time you've thought about this. Now, I personally switched to Linux around November of last year, so it's been, like 6 months since I've switched over, and I've been enjoying the experience of a lot. I was getting fed up with Microsoft doing whatever they want on the computer, and I wanted to liberate myself from that, so I switched over to CachyOS as the distro I chose. I'll get into lots of different distros in a minute, what you might want to consider switching to, but I wanted to free my computer from Microsoft. I wanted to understand how my computer is working, and honestly, it's been a really fun time. It's great learning how to use this operating system, all the little things you can configure that on Windows you'd have to install some random app that's closed source that you have to pay for to get working. On Linux, a lot of stuff's open source and can be free to use. There have also been great developments with the compatibility of Linux with certain things. Like 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted to switch over to Linux, you would have problems getting your apps to run. Even just installing it would have been way more difficult than just using Windows. But at this point, Wine has become much more than what it was all the way back when it started in like the 90s. You can get most Windows apps running. Sure, there are like some things like Adobe and especially kernel level anti-cheat. That's kind of a problem. If you play any games like Fortnite, Valorant, those anti-cheats just won't work on Linux unless there's direct contact from Epic and who's it, Riot that makes Valorant. So those are still problems. Just pulling up ProtonDB over here, you can see about 12% of Steam's entire library is at least silver ranking, meaning there may be a few minor problems, but generally you'll be able to get from start to finish in any game. And I know 12% sounds like a small number, but based off of how big Steam's library is, realistically, the games you're playing are in that 12%. It's like a very rare, very few niche 12 people have bought this game for the rest of that, honestly. And even if your game that you want to play isn't on here, realistically, Proton is so well developed that most games are just going to work. There are still a few reasons I wouldn't recommend switching to Linux. If you need to use any Adobe apps, those still can't run on Linux even under Wine. I think recently I saw something that it's getting closer, but it's still not fully available yet. So I wouldn't recommend it if you need any of those apps. Same with things like Microsoft Word. If you want to play games like Fortnite or Valorant, I personally have a dual boot, so I do most of my gaming on here, but then I'll switch over to Windows if I want to run things like Fortnite. That's literally the only game I need Windows for. That's flat screen. VR works reasonably well, I'd say. The PSVR 2 that I use, you can't use on Linux yet. There are things in the works to get it working. But if you have like a Quest, you can use ALVR if you want to go wireless. Wired, I think ALVR has a wired mode, at least when I last used it. So for anything like VR, if you have a popular headset like a MetaQuest or something, you'll be fine getting it working. Other than those few things, honestly, most apps, if you can't get them running on Linux, there's an alternative out there. There's so many things like Office, for example, Microsoft Office. You have LibreOffice, which I just recently installed. That's not it. Whoops. LibreOffice. You got Writers, your Word, Calc is your Excel, Impress for your PowerPoints and stuff. You can get alternatives to all that stuff working on Linux just as well, if not better than Windows, honestly. But now that we've gotten through the reasons you may want to or may not want to use Linux, let's get into the different Linux distros you can use. I have a document I made that has, yeah, my list of distros I wanted to cover. Okay, preferably, if I set this video up correctly, there should be chapters for a ton of different parts of the video. I'm going to separate the distros part into two different chapters. I'm going to have the gaming distros, and then I'm going to have just the regular classical Linux distros. The only difference for some of these gaming distros is they'll have something like GameScope, like Steam's GameScope session setup, which is what the Steam Deck uses, or they'll have just some different optimizations that make it better for gaming. But generally on the gaming distros, you'll be able to do 99.9% of the things that you'll be able to do on all the regular distros I mentioned. This is going to be easiest for me if I start with the distro I've been using for the past 6 months, CachyOS. I'm just going to say this to start out. If CachyOS hadn't existed, I probably would still be on Windows because of just how easy CachyOS is to set up, as well as the features that you can still use compared to some of the other gaming distros I'm going to mention. So CachyOS is an Arch-based distribution of Linux. I need water. CachyOS is an Arch-based distribution of Linux. Pretty much Arch is like one of the main like distros of Linux. All the gaming distros are going to be derivatives of those. CachyOS is Arch-based. Bazzite and Nobara are both Fedora-based. So that's just how that's kind of organized. CachyOS has all sorts of optimizations built into it that can have some real-world value in performance. Like the kernel has a ton of optimizations. There's tweaks on the system that are optimized. It has a hardware detector built in, so when you're setting up your install, you don't even have to think about installing your AMD or NVIDIA drivers. Those just immediately are picked up by the installer and installed right onto your system. No need to do it all from the terminal. Once you install CachyOS, it boots you right up into this nice old CachyOS Hello app that lets you install all your apps, all the software you need, all the drivers, whatever else was in there, a few system tweaks that you can add on top of what's already tweaked, all just in a nice little app, so you don't even have to worry about thinking about the terminal to start out. Don't get it wrong though, CachyOS is still extremely powerful with it being Arch-based, because you have the power of the AUR available, which is pretty much where it's the Arch user repository, where regular old people can go in, submit their packages for apps, and you can just easily install them either by building from source, by downloading it all manually, or using the built-in Paru app that comes with CachyOS. So you just open up your terminal, type in Paru, and then whatever the package is, type in your user password. Then you can update all your stuff, update, install whatever you want from the AUR. My OBS just update? Wait. I don't want that to happen. Don't cancel my recording, mate. CachyOS has a ton of features built in that make it really easy to get installing apps going if you're someone that doesn't really want to play around with the terminal and just wants an easy way to install all your apps. CachyOS comes pre-installed with the software called Octopi, which is just a graphical manager for Pacman, which is the package manager of Arch and stuff. Makes it really easy to install all your apps without having to worry about typing into the terminal whatever commands if you don't want to memorize them. Despite having all these things to make it really easy to set up, CachyOS is still extremely powerful if you're a power user like I kinda am. You can use the terminal just like you would on a regular Arch distro, use Pacman, use Paru, do everything you would on a normal Linux distro, all still built in here. Arch is often considered like an advanced user distro just because of how hard it is to normally get it set up based off of regular Arch. CachyOS makes that really easy, really simple to get started. They have great documentation on everything you need to know on how to use your distro well, really well. And even then, you got the Arch wiki right there, which is just a collection of like everything Arch. So that is fully compatible with CachyOS, since CachyOS is just Arch at the end of the day. I can't show it to you, but I even did this thing. This is just to sell you on Linux even more. I have it set up so I can have like my main desktop environment in this one keybind, and then if I hit Control Alt F3, which switches you to a different TTY, you don't really have to know what that means for this video, but it will switch you over to that, and it will open up Steam gaming mode, which is like the Steam Deck's mode. Also an entirely separate window, and you can have both running at the same time, so we could have like, I don't know, a song playing on this one and have Steam gaming mode on the other one, have a full browser, be able to easily switch between them. It's really cool. CachyOS is like the perfect middle ground of being able to use Linux, understand the terminal really well, but also be accessible to the people that don't really want to. You still have to learn a little bit. I can't say it's like just immediate plug and play, install it, and you're getting going on your software and your games, but it's really accessible. So this is the one I recommend the most. But if you just want things to work out, these next two might be better off for you for gaming distros. Have you ever wanted to effectively just have a Steam Deck, but you could install it on a desktop? You could install it on a literal Steam Deck, or you can install it on like a home PC? Bazzite is probably a distribution for you. The entire point of Bazzite as a distro is to make Linux and gaming on Linux specifically as easy and simple as possible, as taking a Steam Deck out of the box, turning it on, and getting it working. It's pretty much just a Steam Deck. So Bazzite has two installers. There's the Steam Gaming Mode one, which is pretty much just the Steam Deck one, but you can still use it for desktop stuff, or there's the one that defaults to a desktop and you can have Steam Gaming Mode. You can add that in later if you want, I'm pretty sure. You should be able to. Something I've just realized I've forgotten to mention this entire time. AMD is technically a lot more supported on Linux than NVIDIA is. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card like I do, it's still perfectly fine. I've been using it since November, it's been great. There is this small thing with DirectX 12 games where NVIDIA does have a 20% performance penalty compared to Windows. It's really close to getting fixed. Not close, but NVIDIA just released the stuff that's needed. They still have a bit more to do. The Proton developers still have a bit more to do, but we're really close to getting DirectX 12 performance to be on par with AMD on Linux. And even then, if you have a strong enough graphics card, you probably won't even notice it. I have a 4070 Super, it's fine. Lower end cards might notice a bit more, but we're getting to work. It's getting closer. The reason I remember that now with Bazzite is because Steam Gaming Mode uses GameScope, which is just, it lets you embed a game into its own like window on Linux. It's kind of a bit hard to describe, but GameScope, they use a different session for it, which is just like if you logged out and opened like a different user on Windows. Bazzite Steam Gaming Mode on that, they still don't technically recommend it with NVIDIA or Intel GPUs if you have like an ARC or something. I use it just fine on NVIDIA. Chances are you won't have many issues. It's a bit buggy, but it works perfectly fine. I haven't noticed anything like majorly wrong with it. The big thing that separates Bazzite from something like CachyOS, Bazzite is immutable, mostly. Bazzite isn't technically just based off of Fedora, it's based off Fedora Atomic, which is the immutable version of Fedora, which pretty much means if you want to install packages the way you normally would on a Linux distro, you can't because that requires you root access, which Bazzite locks down by default. This makes it really beginner friendly because it's pretty much impossible to break anything on Bazzite, but it does mean for someone like me who wants to be using Pacman, which Fedora has something else, they have like RPM or something. If you want to install packages like that the traditional way, you can't really do it. This doesn't mean you can't install more apps on something like Bazzite though, or an immutable distro in general. It just means you have to use something like Flatpak or app images. Flatpaks are like a really easy to use container that you'll install the app in, but it does mean it takes a little bit more storage because each app has to have its own set of files repeated throughout a ton of different containers. App images also use slightly more storage than if you installed the package natively on a regular distro, and those are pretty much the equivalent of running an executable that has everything built into it on Windows. I had actually switched over to Bazzite before I tried to switch over to CachyOS, and it was a perfectly usable experience. You could game on it, you could install your packages. I just wanted something that could give me the best of both worlds of having the gaming mode and having a regular Linux distro to use with it. So I ended up switching over to CachyOS. But if you're a beginner to Linux at all, I would 100% recommend using Bazzite to start out. And then if you eventually feel more comfortable and want to learn more about using Linux, maybe switch over to a distro like CachyOS. It's pretty simple. Just reflash your USB, reinstall it. You lose all your old apps, but it's just like reinstalling Windows. So if you know how to do that, you can probably reinstall a Linux distro and get all your apps back. I just remembered Bazzite also has a ton of optimizations and its own custom kernel, I'm pretty sure. It's similar to how CachyOS does it. So performance, I'm pretty sure people have seen CachyOS do better, but honestly, it's not going to be anything big enough to really be the deciding factor of what distro to use. Now let's say you want your Linux distro to come with all this gaming stuff installed. You want Steam pre-installed, you want Proton, the better Proton managers installed, you want a ton of just gaming tools pre-installed on your Linux distro. You don't want it to be Arch-based because that's a bit daunting to start out, and you don't want it to be immutable like Bazzite is. Your best bet's going to be Nobara. Now, this is getting into stuff that I've never personally tried. I've never used Nobara myself, but it's like the other of the three big, most popular gaming distros right now, so I'm going to talk about it. Nobara is based off of regular Fedora, so anything you need for packages, you can just install all those natively. You don't need to worry about using Flatpaks or app images. You just use the default package manager for Fedora, get all those installed immediately. Now, Nobara is developed by a much smaller team. It's like 1 or 2 people that work on Nobara compared to the big team that they have for CachyOS making it, but that doesn't stop it from still being great for gaming. Once again, it's got your kernel optimizations, it's got your system optimizations, everything's optimized, pre-configured, straight for gaming, your drivers are going to be automatic. It's the same for all these other gaming distros, honestly. Just makes getting things set up a little bit easier. That's honestly like all I have to say about it, because I, once again, have never used it, but check out their website, check out CachyOS's website, check out Bazzite's website. I'm going to have all of those linked in the description. Pretty much the way I'd sum it up, if you want to get your hands dirty with Linux, want to understand how it works, but still want something that's pre-configured enough that you can get going fairly easily, use CachyOS. If you want straight into your games, straight into your Steam library, want everything to just work out of the box, really easy, really difficult to break, I'd recommend Bazzite. If you want kind of a mix of both, where you want everything pre-installed there for you to play your games, but it's not exactly advanced work of Linux, it's kind of the step below, you're just starting to learn, Nobara is probably your best bet. Okay, that was a lot of gaming distro talk. Now we can get in to the regular Linux distros, starting off with the one you've probably heard the most about, Ubuntu. Ubuntu is like as basic as it gets for Linux distros. If you've heard of Linux, if you've used Linux, you've probably at least looked into Ubuntu at some point. Now, I don't mean to be biased, but I'm not a fan of Ubuntu. I don't like it that well. It's just really weird. There's other versions of it, like there's like Kubuntu, which has KDE installed for Ubuntu by default. I'm okay with that. Ubuntu server is fine. I use that. That's literally what's on my server. That's under my desk right now, but I don't like Ubuntu that well. It has a lot to do with the company that makes it. You can look up some of their stuff. I just don't like them that much. You can try it out. Definitely a beginner distro. If you've never used Linux before, Ubuntu's like right there. It's just everything's gonna work immediately for you. You can get stuff set up easily, installing packages is a breeze. Yeah, that's about it. It's Ubuntu. I don't mean to deter you from it. I kind of do, but I just don't like it that much, especially compared to what's coming up next. Speaking of what's coming up next, Linux Mint. Linux Mint is literally, if you took what I disliked about Ubuntu and just got rid of it all and made it really easy to use. It's really similar looking to Windows. You could immediately pick up how to use it, and it's really light on performance. You can pretty much install it on any machine. An old laptop, like the laptop that's right down there that is my server, used to not be a server. I put Linux Mint on it before because it's just extremely light to use. There's 3 different versions of Linux Mint. The only differences between them is the desktop environment that they all come with, and there's like different levels to them. One uses a good amount of performance, not a lot, like still very little, especially compared to Windows, but it uses slightly more, and then it goes down to the 3rd level, and that's like bare bones. You're getting the most performance out of that one. Linux Mint is still based on Ubuntu, but they made it significantly better. It's way easier to get going. It's way easier. Everything about Linux Mint is just better. You want to start using Linux, you want to learn, and Linux Mint just makes it, it's like that. You just use Linux Mint if you're just starting out and you really don't want to have to learn too hard about how Linux works, and you just want to be able to do what you normally do on Windows on Linux. Linux Mint's right there. Now, I will say the packages on Linux Mint are a bit outdated compared to other distros. It's the same with Ubuntu, but that's just because they release updates every now and again, as opposed to something like Arch with CachyOS that's roll and release. Whenever there's a new available package, you can just immediately install that. That doesn't make it bad, however. Linux Mint is still perfectly fine. I love it as a distro. Now we get into our final distro. It's another one that I've never personally used, but it's really popular, especially for people coming over from Windows. It's quite literally just the Windows of Linux. It's Zorin. Zorin OS is quite literally, okay, how can we make Linux look as close to Windows as possible and function as close to Windows as possible to make it so people can use Linux instead of Windows? Now, I've personally never liked Zorin because it's really similar to Windows. I think if you want to learn Linux, you're going to learn Linux. You don't want to just use Windows as a Linux distro. But if it gets new people to start to want to learn Linux and make it really easy for newcomers, I'll accept that with open arms. It also comes pre-installed with like a ton of software that you would normally need an alternative for on Linux anyway, like Microsoft Office. Can't get that on Linux. There's whatever's in Zorin pre-installed for that. There's image editors, there's video editors, all easily available from within Zorin, making it really easy to switch over. And just because it looks like Windows, it definitely does not perform like Windows. Windows is really, really weird with how it uses resources. Linux is generally just going to be faster no matter what, except for games, because drivers on Linux, unfortunately, NVIDIA and AMD don't do the greatest with porting them over. And especially with games, most of them need Proton, which you're going to see a very tiny performance penalty from, but not at all unusable. You can definitely game on any of these distros. Out of these beginner distros, use Ubuntu if you want to use Ubuntu, I guess. Use Linux Mint if you want something that's going to be similar to Windows, but is still Linux under the hood and you want to learn a little about Linux. Use Zorin if you just want to be on Linux, but want it to look and act like Windows normally would. That is every distro I had planned, but there is so many Linux distros, because anyone can make one. You could look one up, you could find anything. So do your own research if you want to find others, if none of these seemed appealing to you. I tried to cover like every ground of what you'd want in Linux, from practically just being Windows to being as far away from Windows as possible. So yeah, that's about it. I've been recording for an hour and 17 minutes. To be fair, I got a call, and so I walked away for like 20 minutes of that, but there's a lot of takes I've got to edit out of this, and a lot of things, a lot of visuals I want to add in, so hopefully this video was good and helpful for people that want to use Linux. I'm just really passionate about it. Next video will be about probably something completely different, because this is just like my TikTok. I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And I have a lot of interests, so prepare for variety in these videos. But yeah, hope you consider switching to Linux. It's great. I recorded this whole video on Linux, and I got my notes here on Linux. I also had to pay $5 to be able to use my iPhone as a camera, because the alternative was this 720p Logitech camera, and no one would want to see that, trust me. So yeah, go follow me on TikTok. I'm gonna put it in the comments.